Imagine holding a glass of water in your hand. Transparent. Flowing. Seemingly simple. Yet this substance that covers over 70% of our planet might be far more extraordinary than we ever suspected. What if the most common liquid on Earth, the very substance that makes up about 60% of our bodies, exists in a strange twilight zone between what we typically consider living and non-living? In laboratories around the world, scientists have been uncovering properties of water that defy conventional understanding. Properties that suggest water might possess characteristics we typically associate only with living systems. The idea sounds preposterous at first. Water as a potentially living substance? It contradicts our fundamental definitions of life. Yet as we examine the evidence, this seemingly absurd notion begins to take on a compelling form. Dr. Gerald Pollack, a professor of bioengineering at the University of Washington, has spent decades studying what he calls the fourth phase of water. In his 2013 book The Fourth Phase of Water, Beyond Solid, Liquid, and Vapor, Pollack presents evidence for a gel-like state of water that exists at interfaces, particularly hygrophilic, water-loving, surfaces. This is not your ordinary water, Pollack explained during his 2009 TED Talk. It has a higher density, a higher viscosity, a negative charge, and most surprisingly, it can exclude practically anything that is dissolved in the water. This exclusion zone, easy water, as Pollack calls it, behaves differently than bulk water. It forms a structured arrangement of molecules, creates boundaries, generates electrical potential, and responds to light energy, particularly infrared wavelengths. These are qualities reminiscent of biological systems. But the peculiarities of water extend far beyond this fourth phase. In 2019, researchers at ETH Zurich led by Professor Nikita Kavakine discovered that water flowing through carbon nanotubes generates small electric currents. This phenomenon, which they named the hydroelectric effect, occurs because water molecules orient themselves in response to the tube's surface, creating a flow of charge. What is remarkable is that this resembles the way living cells generate energy. Water exhibits memory-like properties, explains Dr. Peyton Jacobs, a physical chemist at the University of California, Berkeley. When water flows around obstacles, it creates vortices, patterns that can persist over time and distance. These patterns contain information about the obstacles encountered. In a very real sense, water remembers where it has been. This memory-like quality of water has been the subject of intense scientific debate. In the early 2000s, the late Nobel laureate Luc Montagnier conducted controversial experiments suggesting that water could retain the electromagnetic signature of DNA molecules even after the DNA itself had been filtered out. While his findings remain contentious, they highlight the ongoing scientific exploration of water's unusual properties. Water also demonstrates what appear to be self-organizing behaviors. When water freezes into snowflakes, it forms intricate, fractal patterns that are never exactly the same twice. This emergent complexity from simple molecules hints at principles that blur the line between non-living and living systems. What defines life? Asks Dr. Grace Mitchell, astrobiologist at NASA's Astrobiology Institute. If we say life must metabolize energy, respond to stimuli, reproduce, adapt, and maintain homeostasis, water exhibits analogs to several of these criteria. Consider this: water absorbs energy, particularly infrared radiation. It responds to environmental changes by altering its molecular structure. Through the water cycle, it maintains a kind of planetary homeostasis. And while water does not reproduce in the biological sense, it does propagate its structural patterns through hydrogen bonding. The quantum behavior of water molecules adds another layer of mystery. In 2018, researchers at the Max Planck Institute for Solid-State Research discovered that the hydrogen bonds in water exhibit quantum coherence, a phenomenon where particles maintain a coordinated quantum state over relatively long distances in time periods. Such quantum coherence has been detected in photosynthetic systems and is suspected to play a role in certain biological processes, including bird navigation and possibly even human consciousness. Quantum coherence in water is particularly intriguing, explains Dr. Anders Nielsen, professor of chemical physics at Stockholm University. It suggests that water molecules can communicate instantaneously across distances in ways that classical physics cannot explain. Water's strangeness extends to its role as a universal solvent. It dissolves more substances than any other liquid, earning it the title universal solvent. This ability comes from water's polarity and hydrogen bonding capabilities. But this solvent power is not indiscriminate. Water has preferences. It interacts differently with various substances, almost as if making choices. The concept of water as potentially alive gains further credence when we consider recent discoveries in our understanding of what constitutes life. For decades, we believed viruses existed in a gray area, not quite alive because they cannot reproduce without hijacking the cellular machinery of hosts. Yet modern virology now generally considers viruses to be living entities, albeit at the boundary of our definition. Similarly, prion infectious proteins responsible for diseases like Creutzfeldt-Jakob and mad cow disease can replicate without DNA or RNA by causing normal proteins to refold into abnormal conformations. Are they alive? The question challenges our definitions. In 2016, Dr. Sarah Walker, an astrobiologist and theoretical physicist at Arizona State University, proposed that we should define life not by its material components but by its information processing capabilities. Under this definition, systems that process and propagate information could be considered alive in some sense, and water, with its memory-like properties and pattern formation, begins to look more lifelike. We may need to rethink our binary categorization of things as either living or non-living, Walker suggested in her paper published in Origins of Life and Evolution of Biospheres. There could be a spectrum of aliveness where various systems exhibit different degrees of lifelike properties. Water's role in the origin of life provides another tantalizing connection. In the primordial soup of early Earth, water did not merely serve as a passive medium for the chemistry of life to unfold. According to research by Dr. Francis Westel at the Centre National de la Recherche Scientifique in France, water actively participated in the chemical reactions that led to the first organic molecules. The interfaces between water and minerals, particularly clay surfaces and hydrothermal vents, created energy gradients that drove prebiotic chemistry. Water molecules oriented themselves at these interfaces, forming structured layers that facilitated the concentration and organization of organic compounds. Water is not just the stage upon which the drama of life plays out, explains Dr. Mitchell. It is an active participant in the performance. Perhaps most compelling is water's anomalous expansion when it freezes. Unlike most substances that contract when cooled, water expands when it turns to ice, making the solid form less dense than the liquid. This seemingly simple property has profound implications for life on Earth. Because ice floats, bodies of water freeze from the top down, allowing aquatic life to survive in the liquid water beneath. This property appears to be a cosmic coincidence, yet one so perfectly suited to sustaining life that it gives one pause. Is it merely chance, or does it reflect a deeper principle about water's relationship with life? The scientific community remains divided on how to interpret these unusual properties. Some see them simply as interesting physical phenomena that happen to benefit life but are not themselves lifelike. Others wonder if we are glimpsing a more profound truth about the continuum between non-living and living matter. The boundary between living and non-living is not as clear-cut as we once thought, explains Dr. Philip Jenkins, biophysicist at Cambridge University. Recent discoveries in systems chemistry show that non-living chemical systems can exhibit surprisingly lifelike behaviors when driven far from equilibrium. Jenkins points to experiments conducted in 2017 by a team at the University of Glasgow led by Professor Lee Cronin. They created inorganic chemical cells called ICHELLs, inorganic chemical cells, that could move, sense their environment, and even display a form of rudimentary evolution. These systems were made not from carbon-based molecules but from polyoxometallates, large metal oxygen clusters. If wholly inorganic systems can display lifelike properties, Jenkins notes, then perhaps water, with its unique molecular structure and quantum behaviors, might indeed possess characteristics that place it somewhere on the spectrum of living systems. Water's unusual properties extend to its role as a biological signaling medium. Research published in 2018 in the journal Science by a team at the Max Planck Institute for Polymer Research demonstrated that water in living cells transmits information through structural changes. These changes propagate much faster than biochemical signals, suggesting water might function as a rapid communication network within and between cells. Consider also the work of Dr. Jacques Benveniste, a French immunologist who in the late 1980s conducted controversial experiments suggesting that water could retain the memory of substances once dissolved in it, even when diluted to the point where no molecules of the original substance remained. While his work was largely dismissed at the time, subsequent research in the field of nanoparticle science has shown that water can indeed form long-lasting, stable structures around various solutes. In 2003, a team led by Professor Martin Chaplin at London South Bank University proposed a model for how water molecules might form large-scale, coherent structures through hydrogen bonding networks. These structures could potentially store and transmit information through their geometric arrangements, a kind of molecular language. Water behaves as if it possesses a form of distributed intelligence, suggests Dr. Mitchell. Not consciousness as we understand it, but a decentralized ability to respond, adapt, and perhaps even learn from environmental stimuli. The implications of these findings extend beyond Earth. In our search for extraterrestrial life, NASA and other space agencies have followed a follow the water strategy based on the assumption that water is necessary for life as we know it. But what if water itself possesses lifelike properties? This would dramatically alter our understanding of potential habitats for life in the universe. On Jupiter's moon Europa and Saturn's moon Enceladus, vast subsurface oceans exist beneath icy crusts. These oceans are kept liquid by tidal heating, the gravitational pull of their parent planets flexing the moons and generating heat. If water itself can exhibit lifelike behaviors, these seemingly barren ocean worlds might be teeming with a form of activity we have not yet learned to recognize. We might need to broaden our conception of what constitutes a living system, explains Dr. Jenkins. If water can demonstrate memory, energy processing, information transfer, and structural adaptation, perhaps the entire hydrosphere of Earth and potentially other worlds could be viewed as a single, vast, slow-moving living system. This perspective resonates with the Gaia hypothesis proposed by James Lovelock and Lynn Margulis in the 1970s, which suggests that Earth functions as a self-regulating organism where biotic and abiotic components interact to maintain conditions suitable for life. Water is central to these regulatory processes, transporting heat through oceanic currents and cycling through atmosphere, land, and sea. In 2022, researchers at the University of Tokyo led by Professor Hajime Tanaka published findings in the journal Nature Communication showing that hydrogen bond networks in water can rearrange themselves in response to dissolved ions in ways that optimize energy efficiency, a behavior reminiscent of how living systems manage energy. What we are discovering about water forces us to reconsider our most fundamental categories, says Dr. Jacobs. The traditional boundaries between physics, chemistry, and biology begin to blur when we look closely at water's behavior. The philosophical implications are profound. Western science has long operated on a Cartesian dualism that separates mind from matter, living from non-living, conscious from unconscious. But what if these distinctions are not absolute? What if nature exists on continuums rather than in discrete categories? Indigenous knowledge systems from cultures worldwide have long regarded water as a living entity. The Maori concept of water as a living being with its own Maori, or life force, Native American traditions that speak of water as a conscious entity, and ancient Greek philosophical traditions that recognized water as one of the fundamental elements of existence all hint at an intuitive understanding of water's special nature that modern science is only beginning to quantify. There is a beauty in rediscovering through scientific inquiry what traditional knowledge systems have maintained for millennia, notes Dr. Mitchell. Not that water possesses consciousness as humans do, but that it exists in a state that defies simple categorization as not alive. As we continue to explore the strange properties of water, we may need to develop new language and concepts that transcend the binary of living versus non-living. Perhaps we will come to see life not as a thing but as a process, a complex dance of energy and information that manifests across scales from molecules to ecosystems. Water, in this view, might occupy a unique position, not quite alive in the conventional sense, but certainly not merely a passive backdrop for life's chemistry. It actively shapes, facilitates, and participates in the processes we associate with living systems. The next time you hold a glass of water, consider that you might be holding something far stranger and more wonderful than a simple collection of H2O molecules. You might be holding a substance that exists at the threshold of what we call life, a substance that flows through all living things on Earth and connects them in a vast, planetary network. Water's story reminds us that the universe is not only stranger than we imagine but possibly stranger than we can imagine. As we continue to unravel its mysteries, we may find ourselves rethinking not just what it means for something to be alive, but what it means to exist at all in this fluid, interconnected cosmos where the boundaries between categories we once thought distinct now appear increasingly permeable. Perhaps water is not alive in the same way that you and I are alive. But it may be that living and non-living are not binary states but points on a spectrum, and water exists in a fascinating intermediate zone that challenges our definitions and expands our understanding of what is possible in the natural world.